Do you love the power of thunder and lightning? Tired of seeing the same types of builds in Inquisitor Martyr? Then let me introduce to you my new Lightning Assassin setup. Yes, I have finally made the Thunderbolt mechanic, introduced way back as a seasonal feature, a key part of a build. At first I was skeptical if it could hold its own against standard weapon setups. So it was even more surprising to see the results I ended up with. I have got two versions for you. One is using the Arc Blade and the other the Arc Sword. After some trial and error and fine-tuning, both are now capable of clearing plus 18 missions with ease, all while using mostly regular relic items, so it's very budget friendly. So let's get started. In accuracy, we put 25 points for the suppression and HP on hit, plus the 60% damage boost for 5 seconds on kill. Survival isn't essential. I just hit the 10-point mark through item bonuses for a nice 2-second boost for the inoculator. And Bloodlust boosts our base crit chance and gives us crit and adrenaline related benefits, like the hidden reserves for healing. But of course, if you have trouble surviving, then feel free to move some points from Bloodlust into survival. The first perk is the Blessing as usual, since that's the best defensive perk in the game. Since Thunderbolts deal heat damage, I chose the Puritan perk for the extra heat damage and energy shield. But don't worry, you can make this build also work on a Radical Assassin. You can exchange it to perks like Mind Fortress, when you are channeling the Whirlwind attack from the Arc Blades, Diversive Tactics, for more and faster vulnerability debuffs, Vanquisher for more suppression damage and regeneration, which the assassin really needs, or you can go for defensive perks like those that increase your dodge chance. Lastly, we choose Cull the Weak, which is a no-brainer. It gives us a 50% damage boost. For stats, we've got solid defenses with maxed resistances, and once we activate our refractor field, our damage reduction and suppression looks great too. A high crit chance is also important, which we can easily boost further with the Massacre passive in the crit tree. Other stuff that's good is high AoE damage, cooldown reduction, of course a high vulnerability effectiveness for a massive damage boost, and Thunderbolt triggers, with the Thunderbolt on hit being by far the best and the most reliable trigger. Now let's take a look at the items for this build. I aim to keep it low budget, so the only rare item you really need is one of the Signums. The rest can be done with regular relics, which honestly makes this build even more impressive. The Neural Implant grants Enrich tokens on crits. While we don't rely heavily on Enrich tokens with this build, they still give us a nice damage boost, and I think they also increase our Thunderbolt damage. We want to apply as many debuffs as possible, so shock and slow on vulnerability are key. AoE damage is also important, since nearly all of our attacks are AoE based. Plus go for that flat all resist for extra durability and to hit that 60% threshold. The Eye Implant increases the jump range and damage multiplier of Thunderbolts. We also boost our crit chance and strength here. With the 10 points we get from here, we go to 35. Plus with the Culling passive from the debuff tree, we should easily overcome the 46 points threshold to deal 200% crit damage. For the other stats, I recommend getting the AoE damage first, since the movement speed isn't that important. For the main implant, we have two options, depending on the weapon. For Arc Blades, we use the implant that reduces the Thunderbolt cooldown, combined with the Signum that boosts the damage per Enrage token. Even though we lose 1 token per hit, it doesn't matter, since we are constantly channeling Whirlwind. When we use the Arc Sword, we switch to an implant that boosts the crit damage of the Thunderbolts, and also switch our Signum to one that reduces the Thunderbolt cooldowns on crits. For the rest of the enchants, we are focusing on boosting our two main attributes and defenses, while adding AoE damage and vulnerability to sockets. The Purity Seal enchant provides a nice boost to suppression, which is key since the assassin struggles with that. I chose this over Thunderbolt enchants, but feel free to try those out as well. This seal also helps with resistances, cooldown reduction, and it adds the knockdown on crit enchant for another debuff. Shock on crit is a nice extra, but it's not necessary, while fear effectiveness is fantastic for handling tougher enemies. Our next item, the Refractor Field, offers a great boost to suppression and damage reduction. The Fear Aura in melee range is perfect. It quickly applies a debuff that activates our general vulnerability signum, stacking it up to 10 stacks instantly. This then applies those two enchants super quickly, so this is really a nice combo. Key enchants to get here are Suppression on hit, Suppression damage reduction, with vulnerability and AoE damage as extra boosts. Thunderbolt on hit taken is also an option, but not essential. For sockets, we have one Ordinatus Psalm to help with armored enemies, and we boost our vulnerability effectiveness. Next up, I went with the Distortion Armor, which I find is the most useful for melee builds. Its Distortion skill can be a lifesaver when facing tough enemies, or when you are overwhelmed. Besides the increased crit damage for our Thunderbolt enchant, prioritize getting defenses, like damage reduction, all resist, and especially the suppression damage reduction is crucial. I also recommend to get the enchants without the green suppression state requirement, since those can be unreliable and leave you vulnerable in tough situations. For the Psalm Doctrine, we are using the Shock Explosion one. For the extra AoE damage boost, I'm skipping the Shock Aura enchant combo for this build, but if you would like to try it, then just replace your belt enchant with this one. It's of course great for fast grinding, but it can get repetitive since it melts everything too quickly. For the Inoculator, I'm using the enchant that triggers it for free when Thunderbolts hit. Since Thunderbolts hit multiple targets at once and have a short cooldown, it actually triggers pretty often. Even though the 1.9% chance seems low, it really works better than I expected. For sockets, I'm using the Thunderbolt shards, but if those don't feel impactful, I recommend switching to AoE damage, along with vulnerability effectiveness. For my first weapon slot, I use an Arcutech Arc Blade, since this one's Whirlwind attack applies shock instead of slow and isn't weak against armored enemies. But of course when you start out, you can just use a regular relic version until you find this one. The damage per debuff enchant is very powerful here, since we apply so many of them. Life and shield drain are also essential, as well as the crit chance. The Thunderbolt on hit effect is a nice secondary option, but you could also roll the increased whirlwind damage on here instead. For sockets, we are using 2 Thunderbolt shards, 1 shard for suppression gain, and again boosting our vulnerability effectiveness. On our second weapon, we are boosting our Thunderbolt damage by 170%, and we add another target for the chain effect. I suggest adding shield drain on here as well, to keep the shields up for our perk and for our Purity Seal. For extra debuffs, add the stun and knockdown on crit enchants, which also disable enemies, so it's good for survival. For the sockets, we use the same as before. The first signum increases the enrich token damage and is only used if you are playing with the arc blades, so you can roll increased channel damage for the whirlwind attack on here. For the second signum, we use the one that applies general vulnerabilities for a massive damage boost. Also to note is that both signums can roll Thunderbolt on hit enchants, so aim to get those as soon as possible. Now let's talk about the Arc Sword. It's a two-handed weapon, so there is a bit less flexibility with enchants. The main relic enchant to get is the damage per debuff, which can also be rolled on a normal relic version. Shield and life drain are essential. AoE damage is also nice to get, since every attack is AoE based, and of course crit chance is always great to get. We also don't really need the knockdown and stun enchants on here, since we already applied them with our skills. As I mentioned before, when we are using this weapon, we switch out the Signum that reduces the Thunderbolt cooldowns on crits. Otherwise, if we use this one, it's easy to run out of enrage tokens. Now, as an optional damage boost, you can equip in your second loadout a Needler Sniper Rifle. We would only use the Needle Blast, which applies Hallucinations, Needler Toxin and Poison for 3 extra debuffs, which then increases our damage further with this enchant. Plus, if we combine it with this Psalm Doctrine, we can spread those poison effects around even more efficiently. And for the Relic enchant, I recommend getting this one, so we have a way to constantly recharge our Inoculator charges. So let's now go over the passives. In the melee tree, we get a bunch of damage, crit chance boosts, another way to apply vulnerabilities, an increase in suppression damage for flashbane attacks, which our whirlwind attack is. The overwhelm can give us another 50% damage boost, but it only triggers on melee skill use, so we can pretty much only activate it when we are using the Arc Sword, since the channeled whirlwind ability only acts as one skill use, so it will never stack up. Since all of our attacks are AoE based, we nearly max out the AoE tree. The only thing we don't get is this one, since we are not using mines. In the crit tree, we get another 100% damage boost from this passive, and of course stuff that increases our crit chance and strength, plus some healing and suppression damage bonus. I put 3 points in the damage over time tree to make our dots last longer and disable the HP regeneration of enemies. Since both of our weapons and thunderbolts are heat based, I put a bunch of points in the heat attacks tree to apply heat vulnerabilities and burns. I put 1 point in the support tree to increase the inoculator capacity by 3, which puts it at 30. At the usage cost of 10, this gives us 3 instead of 2 charges. In the debuff tree, we get a damage reduction for each unique vulnerability applied and increased crit strength for every debuff applied. And on this side we get a damage reduction for each enemy affected by knockback or knockdown for 10 seconds. In the movement tree, we get a bunch of cooldown reduction and increased movement speed. In the health tree, I chose a bunch of stuff that benefits our suppression. In the defense tree, we get the typical resistance bonuses, the second chance, we increase our energy shield efficiency and our dodge chance. And lastly, I put 1 point in the Puritan tree for the HP and suppression regeneration. If you play a Heretical Assassin, you could choose this one for example instead. Let me now show you some 118 mission runs. Also please don't forget, if you like this content, then like and subscribe. And check out the membership offers if you want to support this channel. Also let me know what kind of build you want to see next. I think I want to try to make a reflect build work, like a Thorns build in Diablo, and see how far I can take it.
Duty prevails. severed the head. Now you can watch the body wander aimlessly until it withers and dies.
Full Auspex lock acquired. Pseudo-kinetic tracking is on, and it is being transmitted to your tactical sensorium. Eliminate negative variables for preferred outcome. Threat eradicated. Mission status updated. Undesired variable removed.
Recoil unclean.
Marked targets eliminated. Enemy command structure compromised. Overall outcome satisfactory. End of log.